welcome to the Bearcats Den with President Taylor. I'm Dr. Ivy Taylor, your host and president of Rusk College. For today's show, we have our new Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Rolundus Rice. Welcome, Dr. Rice.
Hey, thank you for the cordial welcome to the Bearcats Den. Feel like I've arrived.
Yes, you have. And we have been eagerly anticipating your arrival. So you've just been here for just a few days.
Yes, ma'am.
And taking over the permanent Vice President for Academic Affairs position. It was a wonderful process, I think, that brought you to us, facilitated by Academic Search, and we were all very impressed by your background and your journey. So why don't you just introduce yourself to the viewing audience and tell us a little bit about your background and your journey?
Yes, ma'am. So the journey, as you know, has been meandering and very interesting. A native of Atlanta, Georgia, and education was never really a priority for me. I never really carried a book bag when I was in high school.
Wow.
I was assigned to the behavior disorders unit when I was in elementary school. So from the second grade, third grade, fourth grade, I was in classroom settings that did not necessarily challenge my intellectual prowess. So when I finally got to high school, I was behind because in those settings in elementary school, instead of the learning, they would take us outside and do recess 3 or 4 times a day.
Oh my.
So I found myself having to catch up, and I was really unable to do that in high school. So I dropped out. My GPA was a 1.4, and I washed dishes.
What grade were you when you dropped out?
So I was in the 11th grade, but in the 10th grade homeroom.
Okay.
So I guess really the 10th grade.
Okay.
And all of my friends were bypassing me, heading to University of Florida, heading to schools up in the Northeast. And I said, man, what am I going to do? So I was at a low point, but I had to survive, Dr. Taylor. So again, changed tires, washed dishes, drove forklifts, worked in a variety of warehouses. And then I realized it was an epiphany moment. I never will forget it. It was a Friday. My car was repossessed. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, broke up with me. My mother kicked me out the same day. So the circumstances were stacked against me. So I knew at that point I had to do something differently. So I enrolled in the GED program, borrowed money from my grandmother to ride the MARTA bus, which is public transportation in Atlanta.
Yes.
And I went to the GED classes, and that put me on a trajectory that has me sitting across from a college president. It all started with the GED.
Wow. So what was it about the GED program that sparked even more of, that interest in learning more and being more?
That's a very good question. At the time, everyone knew that I had dropped out. So I had no aspirations to go to college. I just had to at least finish the GED.
Yes.
So no one can say, well, at least he couldn't do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But I never will forget getting the phone call that I passed the GED, and the euphoria I felt, and I can compare it even to me defending my dissertation. It was getting that phone call that I passed that was most important to me.
Wow.
So it all began with that credential. And as a few days thereafter, I said, well, maybe I should at least try to go to college. I don't think I'll make it through, but at least people will see that I tried. And at the time, I was just trying to impress my girlfriend, trying to get her back, not knowing that she would one day decide to marry me. But that was the motivation. It was no desire to be a scholar in the field. I just wanted to impress my girlfriend.
I've heard a few gentlemen who ended up on great paths trying to impress a certain young lady.
Yes, ma'am. I was one.
So then where did you end up matriculating for college?
So in Atlanta, I attended a small school called DeVry University with a degree in business. And the first day in class, I said, oh, I'm smart. I can do this. Because my classmates around me, they went the traditional way. They graduated high school And I started college in 2002. So I just turned 20. So I had some life experiences. And that sort of gave me a different perspective about how to approach my coursework. So I'm breezing through the classes, Dr. Taylor. I said, oh man, I'm not going to stop at the undergraduate level. I think there is something I can do after this. And again, I knew that my path was destined to impact other students because many of us have similar backgrounds, whether it's socioeconomic backgrounds, whether it is other factors. I knew that I could speak a language that others would understand because I lived it. And I think that's what sort of buttresses my approach to holistic student development.
Okay, so then you proceeded beyond and persisted. Once you finished up the bachelor's degree, you decided to go on and get a master's.
I did. So again, from Atlanta, Dr. Taylor. So the birthplace of Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Young's presence, Ralph Abernathy, these civil rights icons. So initially, I wanted to go to law school. So I studied for the LSAT, did a decent job, got into a few law schools, but history was always in me.
Okay.
I can recall as a little boy, I would spend time with my cousins, and they would want to watch ESPN, and I would watch it sometimes as well. But I would always take the remote and turn to the History Channel. They was like, oh man, Roe is coming over. We got to make sure we hide the remotes because I would bore them to death with the History Channel. So I applied to Alabama State, the birthplace of the civil rights movement. The boycott actually began on that campus. And Alabama State initially denied me admission, despite the fact that I graduated summa cum laude. And so I appealed to the chairperson, and she wrote back and said, okay, well, I think you have some promise, though you've never really studied history. So they admitted me. And that is where I found my purpose. So I studied for the MA in history there. I wrote my thesis on Dr. King at his pastorate at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And I learned during that academic odyssey that I should continue my studies in history. But that was where I found out that an HBCU is the map and vehicle for so many. It is womb and mother for so many. And I think here at Rusk College, we can inculcate that same identity into our students under your leadership, of course.
Well, I think it's a little fascinating, though, that you grew up in the shadow of all those great schools in Atlanta, but you discovered the greatness of HBCUs at Alabama State. Had you had any interaction with, the renowned schools, HBCUs in Atlanta growing up?
A funny story, Dr. Taylor, and a wonderful question. So my cousin Samuel, and his friend Kirk, we would ride in the Fifth Avenue. It was an old Fifth Avenue. And my cousin Samuel was enrolled at Morris Brown. And Morris Brown in Atlanta has this unique consortium of Morehouse, Morris Brown, Clark Atlanta, Spelman, and the Theological Seminary. There is no other unit like that in the world. And so I grew up maybe 20 minutes from downtown. So we would ride through the campus, and as a young man, my girlfriend had dumped me, so I was always looking around. I said, man, there's Spelman, and there's Clark Atlanta, here's Moby, as they called it. So my very first experience at an HBCU was at Morris Brown. And at the time, I was still a high school dropout, so I could not be admitted into those institutions. But they were so intimidating because you think about all of those folks who matriculated.
The great leaders.
The leaders of the movement and business, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Ralph Abernathy, Hosea Williams, and Maynard Jackson, so many others went through those hallowed walls. So I went to Alabama State on a whim because my younger brother, his name is Randall. He's pretty smooth, Dr. Taylor. I dropped him off at campus one day driving my old Cadillac. And I said, Rand, the water isn't hot. The air conditioning doesn't work in the summertime. How can you embrace this experience. He said, man, you just got to live it to understand it.
Wow.
And a few years later, here I am enrolling in Alabama State. They gave me a chance with no experience in history. I had no idea of the study of it. I didn't know how to write as a historian. I had no real background, but they gave me a chance. And I asked myself, where would I be if Alabama State did not give me a chance? So where would many students be if Russ did not give them a chance? And I think that's how we continue to approach opportunity and service in a creative way.
You've hit the nail on the head there, kind of the crux of, that HBCU magic and mystique that we've been giving people an opportunity for here at Russ 155 years, people who may not have had a chance elsewhere. Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about your vision and your plans and the things that we'll work on together here at Russ College to continue to expand opportunities for young people.
Very well, ma'am. Looking forward.
We'll be right back after this break. Please enjoy a selection by the world-renowned Russ College a cappella choir under the direction of Dr. Arlandra Harvey.
Oh, the world is full of colleges, but there's one that is my own. For it stood for education when it had to stand alone. Russ was first to give some learning unto those who were set free. Of all the schools in all the world, Russ is the one for me. College mine, mine, mine. Oh, Russ is mine, mine, mine. The alumni and the students are so proud to be called thine. There is none like you, oh, royal white and blue. College mine, so divine. College mine, mine, mine.
Welcome back to the Bearcats Den with President Taylor. I'm Dr. Ivy Taylor, your host, and today's guest is Dr. Rolundus Rice, our Vice President for Academic Affairs at Russ College. Dr. Rice, I enjoyed hearing about your journey. I have a question about your experience in the K through 12 Atlanta schools. In retrospect, with all the achievements that you have now and the experience that you've gained working in various venues in higher education, what do you think was missing when you were a kid in those classrooms in Atlanta where the spark was not ignited for you?
I think two things, Dr. Taylor. And number one, my father was never in the home. So I grew up without a father.
Okay.
And I never had a black male teacher.
Okay. Oh, okay.
From kindergarten through 12th grade. I never had a teacher who had a terminal degree.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying that a terminal degree denotes one's abilities all the time,
Yes.
but I never had that. And I think there was a second component, and that component was if I was misbehaving in the second grade, I was automatically labeled for the third grade because teachers talked. So I was known as the problem child, the one who had to be on Ritalin, who had ADD, as the doctor said. So it was always just put Rolundus in the corner, keep him quiet, and don't really, teach him anything. Now, I did have some teachers who cared about me, but they assumed that I was intellectually incapable of performing. And it was the labeling, the lack of male influences. And in our communities, we have strong women, strong mothers, but young men, it is imperative for them to also have a balanced approach to life. And that often comes with strong, positive male influences, and that's what I did not receive in the K through 12 school system.
Okay, fascinating. So now, let's fast forward, move to the present. With that knowledge in mind, what will be your approach as it relates to the core of what we do here at Rusk College, which is our academic program?
Very good question again, Dr. Taylor. And again, I've been here a little bit less than 2 weeks. and each day I see opportunities for us to recalibrate or reimagine how we view the academy. And what we're doing for us to be viable, sustainable, to go from being behind to ahead of our time is going to require a collective approach with faculty, staff, and students. And if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a whole college to make and mold a student. So I think we have to look at our gen ed courses, look at what every student should receive here at Rusk College. There are certain classes that one would assume that students should absolutely take. You cannot attend an HBCU and not leave these walls knowing your history, knowing who you are,
Yes.
and knowing what you can contribute to this knowledge-based global economy. I think we have to look at new instructional models or delivery of instructional material, because all students don't learn the same way. So we have to figure out this approach with blending research, teaching, and service. Though we are a teaching institution, our faculty, it helps when they are deeply involved in their fields, because research, this delivery of new knowledge, this is what allows any academic entity to produce other scholars who go out, do great things. So revising the curriculum in collaboration with the faculty, listening to what business and industry wants to see in our graduates, because we don't simply want to usher a student across the stage at graduation with a diploma in one hand and not having a job offer in the next hand. So we have to give these students what they need, so not only they can be successful in their jobs, but also being their own revenue generators themselves.
Yes.
Because relying on one stream of income is just not sustainable for all people. And I think that's one way that we start. So new academic programs, I think even a graduate degree or graduate degrees, equipping them at a higher level to compete with not just any HBCU, but any college and university in the world, where people can say, oh, that young man went to Rusk, that young woman went to Rusk. Let us build a path to Holly Springs, and it begins in the classroom.
Well, your enthusiasm is infectious, and I hope that will be passed on to both the faculty and the students. Let me rewind to your background as a historian, and the fact that you mentioned that any student who attends an HBCU should be grounded in an understanding of, the history and struggle of Black people in America and throughout the world.
Sure.
So a lot of young people, though, think history is boring. So talk to me about how we make that connection to engage them in learning about ourselves and our history, and then how that translates into success for them in the future.
Well, a very good observation, Dr. Taylor. And as R.G. Collingwood said many years ago, one of the eminent historians, he said the only clue to what man can do is what man has already done. So when we're able to share in an introductory course in African American history that this school was founded 1 year after the Emancipation Proclamation, at a time when there were 4 million people who were formerly enslaved, who could be killed for learning how to read, who could not enter into marriage, because marriage at the time was considered to be a binding contract, and slaves, of course, could not enter into a contract because they were not considered people. They were property, movable property, chattel property. So when our students understand that out of slavery we produced a Carter G. Woodson, we produced Nobel laureates. We produce luminaries in the sciences, all because there was something taught to them, something ingrained in them that no matter what you encounter, you have the fortitude, the intestinal fortitude to surmount any odds that are before you. So I think we share those stories in those intro courses, and it depends on the enthusiasm of the person who's teaching that class. I can recall teaching history at another institution, and I can recall my students, it would be 80 students, and their friends would come to the class. They would just sit in and want to just observe.
Yes.
And so it created a thirst for the knowledge. And I'm not saying that I'm just the professor extraordinaire, but the passion and empathy that the professor has that's projected to those students, it matters.
Okay.
It makes the student want to come to class. Why? Because they don't want to disappoint you. And when a student doesn't want to disappoint their professor, they will go the extra mile. They'll read the extra book. They'll write the extra page. They'll proofread it one more time because they don't want you to be upset or disappointed in their ability. So it goes back to a level of respect and preparation that all of our faculty have to continue to have each time they step before a student. It's sort of like on Sunday mornings, you know when a preacher is not has not really prepared for the sermon. You fall asleep.
Yes, yes.
And I've fallen asleep many times in church. I had to get a pull at the lapel. So it all goes back to preparation, enthusiasm, and delivering the material in a way that a student, a 21st century student, can understand and appreciate.
And how do you, in your role as Vice President for Academic Affairs, anticipate being able to support the faculty so that they can show up in the classroom in the manner that you just described?
Well, I think it's a variety of ways, Dr. Taylor. I think it involves many conversations with each faculty member to learn a little bit about them and their backgrounds. I think is a strong faculty development piece because we have faculty, I think world-class faculty, who know their craft and subject area, and I think it helps when we are exposed to people outside of Holly Springs, outside of Mississippi, even outside of the South or the nation, when we learn from different people from different backgrounds on what works in Massachusetts, what works in California, what works in other parts of the world. And when we have that information together, we can combine high impact practices. So it's all about exposure and access to different modes of instruction, development, fundraising, and how we can combine those methods and bring that to our classrooms here at Rusk College.
I think we have time for one more quick question. I want to go back to your early history. You mentioned that one of your challenges as a kid was the lack of black teachers. You never saw a black male teacher. What are some ideas that you have about how we can be part of creating a pipeline of black male teachers through our education program here at Rusk College?
Another good question. I think that we don't start recruiting faculty when they're PhD students or when they are about to defend, because at that point, many other schools are courting them the same way. We have to build pipelines to faculty even when we know that students are desirous of going into education. We have to start talking to them in high school and in undergraduate studies. So when they are in the point to where they're ready to graduate, and not only do we support them, but we mentor them and even provide some type of access and incentives for them to join us here at Rusk College. So it begins 8 to 9 years before they are ready for a faculty position. We're planting the seed as early as possible so that one day that seed will grow and germinate and grow into a towering timber that provides shade for so many. And I think that is the best way to bring the best faculty to Rusk College, by starting as early as possible.
Well, very well said, and puts me in the mind of our motto here: by their fruits ye shall know them.
You shall know them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rice. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm very much looking forward to a wonderful, fruitful working relationship.
Hey, here, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of the Bearcats Den. We'll see you next time.